At a bigger area of rain developing through the morning, perhaps over parts of the Midlands, southern England, and then lingering across eastern England in particular through the afternoon. So quite a wet second half of the day across eastern England. Turning drier through Wales and the southwest, sunny spells for western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So a brighter day here. Still quite mild in the south, but it won't feel as warm with the clouds and the outbreaks of rain, which will still be pretty heavy during the evening time before that wet weather slowly pushes out into the North Sea as we head into Thursday morning. Following on behind, clear skies will allow a touch of frost in places to start Thursday. For many, it's a bright start, though, with sunny spells. Band of showery rain will cross Scotland and Northern Ireland during the course of the day before that starts to pull away. A bit of patchy rain for North Wales, Northern England for a time, but much of the south and east of England certainly having another sunny day on Thursday. And look at this, from Friday onwards, even into the weekend. Some patchy cloud, but many places looking fine, bright and sunny, although it will be windy along the south coast. Bye for now.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, just gone 4 o'clock. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Coming up in the next 60 minutes for you. Dig up the patio and get planting potatoes. The farmer who says Britain is sleepwalking into a shortage of food that could see us return to wartime rationing. Also, if your colleague tests positive for COVID and comes to work, do you have the right to ask them not to? We debate how not everyone is relaxed about the relaxation of self-isolation rules. And the original super spreader event, yes, the Cheltenham Festival, roaring back to life. The Guinness is flowing, the bookies are smiling, and there is nary a mask in sight. Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, the commentator Tonya Buxton. But first, we have the headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 4. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The government says a further 350 Russian individuals and entities have been sanctioned following the invasion of Ukraine. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the UK is going further and faster than ever, hitting those closest to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Foreign Office says oligarchs sanctioned today have an estimated total wealth of more than £100 billion. It's after President Volodymyr Zelensky warned Western leaders sanctions aren't enough to end the war. Boris Johnson says we need to stop being so dependent on Russia for oil and gas.
Vladimir Putin over the last years has been like a pusher, feeding an addiction in Western countries to his hydrocarbons, to his oil and gas. We need to get ourselves off that addiction.
NATO's concerned Russia may use chemical weapons in a so-called false flag attack as part of its invasion. Ahead of a meeting with defence ministers tomorrow, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia may attempt to pin the blame on any such attack on Ukraine. He said there are hundreds of thousands of forces on high alert, ready to defend the border.
Now they are making absurd claims about biological labs and chemical weapons in Ukraine. This is just another lie. And we are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons.
Jens Stoltenberg there, speaking via video link at a meeting of Northern European leaders. Zelensky urged them to protect their own security by helping Ukraine defend itself.
You know the kind of weapon we need, everyone knows. You know what kind of defense measures we need. Sanctions are not enough, although we're very grateful for that. So the aggressive plans of Russia has not yet collapsed, and it is understandable why, because the world is silent after 2 nuclear power plants were captured. We're just hearing words, and that's not enough.
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky there. The mayor of Ukraine's capital says there'll be a 35-hour curfew in Kiev from this evening, lasting until Thursday morning. Vitaly Klitschko's announcement follows large explosions overnight, leaving 2 people dead and residential buildings heavily damaged. Meanwhile, in the besieged city Mariupol, around 2,000 cars have been able to leave. That's according to officials. Peace negotiations between Moscow and Kiev resumed today after being paused yesterday. Mr. Klitschko says there's a huge number of injured people in hospitals.
We will defend our city. It's our homes. We never think to leave. It's our homes. We defend our children, family, our buildings, our city, and our future of Ukraine.
An American cameraman has been killed near Kiev. Fox News announced that war zone photographer Pierre Zakshevsky died yesterday after his vehicle was struck by incoming fire. He was reporting with another Fox News journalist, Benjamin Hall, who's currently injured in hospital. Russian prosecutors are looking to move Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny to a maximum security prison. They've also asked a court to hand Navalny an additional 13 years of jail time for fraud and contempt of court charges. He's already serving a 2.5-year sentence at a prison camp in Moscow for parole violations. The UN has urged authorities to ensure the journalist who interrupted a live news broadcast on a Russian state television channel is not punished. Channel 1 editor Marina Ovsyannikova ran onto the set of the network's live nightly news show last night with a sign reading, "Don't believe propaganda, they're lying to you." The Kremlin described her actions as hooliganism. And back here, face coverings will remain compulsory on public transport and enclosed public settings in Scotland. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's announced she will not relax the rules on masks due to a current spike in case numbers. The legal requirement for businesses to retain customers' contact details will be dropped as planned. The restrictions will be reviewed again in 2 weeks' time. And Boris Johnson says negotiations over the detention in Iran of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe are delicate. Hopes have been raised about the 43-year-old's potential release after she reportedly had her British passport returned to her. The Prime Minister says he doesn't want to tempt fate while negotiations are ongoing. Ms. Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been detained in Iran since her arrest in 2016 on charges of plotting to overthrow the government, allegations she denies. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Afternoon, 7 minutes past 4. Coming up this hour, life after COVID will be live among the 200,000 or so punters who will be gathering at this year's Cheltenham Festival. And we'll hear too from the British farmer who says, if we don't start growing more of our own food, we risk a return to wartime rationing. But first, what price principle? Let me put that another way. If you want to keep the lights on, keep your car on the road, have a hot shower, maybe you also have to accept that the fuel that makes all those things happen cannot come always from an ethical source. Tonight, Boris Johnson is flying to Saudi Arabia. He wants the Gulf state to increase production of oil and gas, which would make the price across the piece go down. But will Mr. Johnson, as he pleads for Saudi generosity, also mention Saudi cruelty, mention the fact that on Saturday, 81 men were beheaded there, some of whom were killed under the country's medieval penal laws for, quotes, deviant behaviour. Joining me now, long-standing human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell. Peter Tatchell, thanks for your time. What do you think, in the eyes of Saudi law, constitutes deviant behaviour?
Well, of course, all these 81 men were executed after unfair trials. The Saudi criminal justice system is not transparent. Defendants don't have the same rights as we have in Western courts. So there must be huge doubt over any of them being guilty of the said crimes. Now, the deviant behavior that some of them were allegedly killed for almost certainly includes belonging to a minority Muslim sect, the Shias. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni Muslim country, Sunni-led regime, and they do persecute Shia Muslims who they regard as heretics, blasphemers, and apostates. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we know that some people were, at least one person was executed for having participated in peaceful demonstrations and shouting political slogans. So I think in all these cases, we must say that there is serious grave doubt about whether any of these men were executed for legitimate, justifiable reasons.
Sad to say, Saudi Arabia is not alone in having a criminal justice system that is iniquitous, pernicious, and lacking in transparency. But few of those countries we are right now, given events in Ukraine, having to act almost as a supplicant towards. We are practically begging Saudi to turn on the gas and oil taps.
Well, it is understandable that we do that, but it would be so wrong that having condemned Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the war crimes they've committed there, that we turn to the Saudis who are committing mass bombing and war crimes against the people of Yemen. You know, Saudi Arabia is laying waste to rubble Yemen cities and towns. It is doing mass indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas. Thousands of civilians have been killed by Saudi airstrikes. And sadly, Britain is actually supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia. We have supplied over £2 billion worth of armaments to Saudi Arabia since Saudi Arabia began its intervention in Yemen. So to break off relations and economic ties with one tyranny, Russia, and then to turn to another tyranny, Saudi Arabia, strikes me as morally incomprehensible.
Morally incomprehensible, but it's practically understandable, isn't it? It's one thing to lose those economic ties with Russia. If we were to do that with Saudi, then it would be difficult to see how we could keep the lights on, keep the cars running, keep the economy ticking over. If politics is the art of the possible, we have to expect, indeed he's obliged, sadly, to enter a sort of Faustian pact Boris Johnson on our behalf and go to the Saudis and say, please?
Well, there are lesser tyrannical regimes that we could turn to. You know, I've been a very strong critic of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. It has the world's largest oil reserves, and I think, much as I dislike the idea, it'd be preferable to take oil from Venezuela than from Saudi Arabia. There are other oil-producing states like Brunei and others where we could also turn. So it isn't if it's Saudi Arabia or nothing. Plus, of course, we could speed up the progress to renewable energy. Now, that will take some time, I accept, but we have to shift to
fracking, Peter Tatchell, and things like fracking and North Sea oil?
In the interim, that would be preferable to taking oil and gas from tyrannical regimes, but only in the interim. You know, we have enormous renewable energy options in this country: solar, wind, tidal, hydro. The 7 barrage or tidal pool system, if it was built, could provide 7% of our entire energy. And I think that Britain now needs, in this circumstance, to reorient our whole economy towards self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency in energy, but also in food and everything else.
Well,
we must not be in a position where we are dependent on other countries and potential conflict zones which can cut off our vital supplies.
Well,
that would be a huge, huge mistake.
Peter Tatchell, I encourage you to keep watching, along with all our other viewers, because that is something with regards to food that we'll be debating in the next half an hour or thereabouts. Peter Tatchell, thanks so much as ever for your time. Thanks very much indeed. Tonya Buxton is with me for the next 2 hours to reflect on this, actually, Tonya, that there aren't many commentators. Peter Tatchell, I think, is always intellectually brave in these things. When I said to him, what about fracking? There are some people on his side of the ideological argument who would have said no. He said, actually, yes, in the interim, yes. I admire him all the more for that, but that's the kind of person he is.
But what he was speaking about was pure common sense. And the thing is, before we started getting power and food from other countries, shouldn't we have made sure that we could do it ourselves first? So before we absolutely start concreting up fracking places, don't we need to check that we've got enough power for our country? Don't we need to just become a little bit more sustainable? Whose idea was it? Didn't we learn the lessons of the Second World War, when everybody had to start farming again and doing this because we couldn't sustain ourselves? Did we learn nothing then? Clearly not.
And just on the point, we'll come on to the food a little later on in the programme, but on the point about going to the Saudis, I just don't see how we've got a choice. I mean, it's a really, really unenviable prospect. But, I know Peter Tatchell's saying, what about Venezuela? If you look at world oil production, so much of it comes from the Saudis.
Yeah.
They have to be part of the energy mix for us. It's simple as that.
I feel exactly as he does. I mean, we're going from one dreadful regime to another. Why does it make it better? Why are the Saudis getting away with so much? And, next minute they'll be doing something that we don't like. And why are we not as offended by their disruption and their killing in the Yemen? I mean, we're talking about the famine, children starving to death in the Yemen. That doesn't bother us as much as Ukraine.
That's all true, but you're going to have to explain to people on the forecourts in a month's time, if we haven't greased up to the Saudis and got them to turn on the taps, why it is they're paying £2.50 for diesel, or even their diesel's been rationed by that stage, and we're back to the long queues at the forecourts. And you patiently explain, once they've wound their window down, why it is they're having to do that, because we've got to be tough on the Saudis. They won't wear it.
They won't wear it, but, this is what frustrates me so much about Great Britain. There doesn't seem to be any forethought to anything we do. Before you start going on to like you said, all the renewable energies, that's all great, but what if there is no sun and what if there is no wind? What do we do then? We have to have a B plan, and we should have had that in place now. I know it's a bit late to be saying that, we need it now, but why wasn't that the case? Why aren't the people in charge doing their jobs and making sure that we're covered?
Probably for the same reason that we didn't have a plan for COVID.
Yes.
We'll talk about that.
We will.
Tonya, for now, thanks very much. Nobody really in their right mind could disagree with stripping friends of the Putin regime of assets they hold in the UK, could they? Today the Economic Crime Act passed into law in the early hours of this morning, in fact, in record quick time. So quickly, in fact, that some folk think it sets a dangerous precedent for the state to seize private assets. Of course, it's hard to argue with a legal remedy that sees £100 billion taken from Russians like former President Dmitry Medvedev. But might these sanctions provide a template that will allow the government to grasp the belongings of others without due process or the traditional presumption of innocence? Well, joining me to discuss these questions more is the barrister and author of Justice on Trial, that is Chris Daw. Chris Daw, appreciate your time. Do you have misgivings about this new law?
Well, there's always misgivings when a law is brought in very quickly, but we're living in extraordinary times. We're effectively at economic war with Russia and with Vladimir Putin, and I think that it was necessary for our Parliament to act very quickly. We have for many, many years been, I'm afraid, beholden to Russian wealth in London, in particular. The property market, particularly the upper end of the property market, has depended to a huge degree on Russian wealth, and frankly, much of it comes from the proceeds of what is effectively organised state criminality, the theft of Russian state assets by oligarchs after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And much of that wealth, criminal wealth, in my view, is still floating around in London in so many ways. And for once on your airwaves, this is a piece of legislation with which I have some sympathy, and indeed I can see why it was necessary to act so quickly to bring it into force.
And on one level, I mean, at least it's there, it's statutory, it's been the subject of debate, not protracted debate, but at least some debate. It's not by executive fiat by the government. So there is some sense of deliberation here. But as you say, it's had to be quick as well. And I wonder, some people will wonder, whether it sets perhaps in motion, or at least provides a legal template for the state in the future to say, actually, we don't like you, we'll have what you've got.
Well, I don't think it does. I mean, much of this legislation isn't, in fact, rushed. Much of it was in the planning already, in particular, the Register of Overseas Property Ownership, which is one of the central planks of this legislation. For many years, we've had the situation where overseas corporations could own property in the UK, including some worth tens and tens of millions of pounds, and we had no idea who were the ultimate beneficial owners of the companies behind those properties. So that particular legislation, or that aspect of the legislation, has long been announced and has been given very careful thought. All that's really been rushed through is the approach to sanctions and the seizure of properties which are in the hands of people who are suspected to have links to the Russian regime. And of course, the only reason why it's being rushed is because Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine just a couple of weeks ago. Had he not done so, none of this would have been happening. And I think there are enough safeguards in place. I mean, one of the aspects of the legislation is simply to say that if one of our partner nations or partner organisations like the EU brings in sanctions against somebody, that we can effectively just replicate those sanctions without the need to go through independent process. And we, of course, delegate those sorts of things to our international partners, our trusted international partners, in many different ways. So for me, I think aligning the sanctions regime as between the EU, the US and the UK is something that's very, very important. And I think it could have a big impact on some of the people who have backed Putin all these years.
Chris Daw, just a quick one before we let you go. Bob Seeley, the MP in Parliament, I think it was two weeks ago now, named 4 lawyers under parliamentary privilege who he said were, working for dubious characters within Russian individuals. I did a podcast interview a few days later with Lord Sumption, former Supreme Court judge, who stressed the absolute necessity of lawyers like you being able to represent anybody without any prejudice. That's how the law works. We may not always like it, but it has to be that way.
Yeah, of course it does. I mean, someone said to me last week, what would happen if Vladimir Putin was charged with war crimes and he approached you to represent him? And the answer would be, I have no choice. Our profession, particularly barristers in England and Wales, we are required to take cases that are brought before us or referred to us by solicitors, regardless of our personal moral beliefs. Otherwise, frankly, half of the people who are charged with crimes of many different kinds would never have a lawyer. So even Russian oligarchs and even Vladimir Putin himself, if hopefully one day he faces up to the crimes he's committing at the moment, is entitled to legal representation, as indeed were the Nazis, of course, in the Nuremberg trials, represented by barristers who were doing their job and doing their best within the law and ultimately leaving the decision as to the outcome to the courts. It's not our job to do that, and we do have to represent people. But we also have to be very careful not to take money in situations where the source of that money is unclear. There are very strict rules around how money needs to be carefully accounted for when solicitors in particular accept that money. There are very strict checks and they need to be followed to ensure that dirty money isn't being used in effect to subsidise the defence of people who are effectively war criminals.
Chris Dorr, appreciate your time. Thanks very much. Tonya Buxton alongside me to reflect on that. And this idea, that fundamental legal principle, we can't expect lawyers just to turn their noses up at clients because they want to hold their nose.
No, I mean, your feeling is, yes, don't take it, but that's not the way the law works here. Whether you like it or not, if you're a barrister, you have to take the case that's put in front of you. I've had long discussions with barristers about this, arguing the point that that is the law here, so they do have to take it, whatever happens. And the thing is with these sanctions is it's great that we should know where every piece of property comes from. I completely get that. But I am concerned that there will be some innocent Russians losing their homes and their livelihoods just because they're aligned to Russia. I think there are some horrific oligarchs out there doing some terrible things, spending money that is not theirs, where they've kind of raped the Russian people, taken their money and spending it willy-nilly. But we do have to be a little bit careful about how things proceed.
Tonya, you mentioned food security a little earlier. Let's get into that now. After last night's show, I went home, logged on to a Zoom meeting. It was organised by a group of concerned farmers. They came from a wide range of agricultural backgrounds. Some work on lots of land, some hardly none at all. Some were organic, others were intensive. What united them all was a belief that Britain is sleepwalking into a food crisis. We only grow about half the food we consume, and as events in Ukraine have reminded us, importing produce isn't always possible. But this isn't just about events abroad. Many of the farmers that I listened to last night are angry at what they see as self-inflicted wounds, that Britain's food security is being undermined by trade deals with countries like Australia, that they're being encouraged to plant trees, not crops. It was exactly the argument being made in the Daily Mail today by the farmer and author Jamie Blackett, who says it's time to embrace the spirit, really, of World War II and dig for victory. Jamie Blackett joins me now, as you see. Jamie Blackett, thanks for your time. I proceed in a paragraph there, your piece in the Daily Mail. You're saying Ukraine should be a wake-up call for all consumers in Britain.
Well, I think particularly a wake-up call for the government, Colin. I mean, as you were saying earlier, I mean, it's they who have been sleepwalking into this problem that we have now. And I just correct you actually on what I heard you earlier saying that I'd said that we were heading for rationing. I don't think I actually said that in my piece, but I did discuss quite a bit about what happened in 1939, when during the 30s, during that period of free trade, of globalization, we ran our food security down to about 30%, I think, and we then had to scrabble around to grow more food, and we were reliant on the Atlantic convoys to keep the nation alive. And I mean, what would have defeated us actually was not the Nazis defeating us in battle. It would have been, if that lifeline across the Atlantic had been broken, and we would have literally have been starved into submission. I mean, this is all, slight sort of hyperbole to try to get people to.
No, I know. And Jamie, we apologise for overemphasising or misinterpreting what you were saying about the rationing, and that's absolutely fair. But I mean, I think it's fair to. I was going to say scaremonger. It's not scaremongering. It's presenting people with the worst case scenario. I mean, you do that in your book when you say, imagine an enemy state. It's not that hard to imagine which one that might be right now, using drones to interfere with some of our maritime shipping. And within not very long at all, I mean, I listened to a farmer last night saying, within 2 days, you've got serious problems with social cohesion in this country if there is not enough food on the supermarket shelves. Yeah. The fundamental duty of a government is to keep its people safe. And I would say make sure they get fed, in brackets, follows that.
Yeah, well, I think I tweeted today that Boris has been very good at providing lots of circuses, but he now needs to focus on the bread issue, a classical allusion that he should understand. I mean, it's quite right. We have had I can think of two crises. One was the hauliers strike that, if you remember, came quite close to bringing down the Blair government, when suddenly it looks as if supermarket shelves were going to be empty. And then the other one, of course, was COVID, as we discussed, I think, on here about a week ago, when, that should have been a wake-up call. We were only really able to carry on feeding ourselves because the EU kept borders open through the pandemic. They might just as easily have closed them, and we'd have had a real problem on our hands. And I don't think, we're not going to run out of food. I don't want people to start panic buying, going to the shops. But actually, what's likely to happen is the knock-on effect is going to be on poorer countries. I mean, we're a relatively wealthy nation. We can probably carry on affording to buy food. There is going to be a cost of living crisis for the poorest in society, and that is going to cause real hardship for them and real political problems also for the government. But there are going to be countries who are at the bottom of the pecking order who aren't going to be able to get food very easily, because there is simply less food on the high seas and being exported around the world as a result of this crisis, partly because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. And this is the time of year when they plant their crops. And, they're unable to do that because it's a battlefield, and they probably can't get the diesel and the seed and the fertilizer they need to do that. So, we have got to examine very carefully the issues here. And we have run our food security down. Farmers are not in a position, really. I mean, everybody's turning around saying, come on, farmers, you've got to grow more. But it's just not as simple as that. I mean, there's a liquidity issue. A lot of farmers are probably quite close to their overdraft.
And as somebody said last night, I think it's 5 miles to a gallon from a tractor. There was a dairy farmer who said, yes, we're getting 10p or more for a litre of milk than we did a year ago, but our costs have gone up 10p. So there's so many different factors to this. Jamie Blackett, I recommend people have a look at your piece in the Mail because it's very thought-provoking and covers a lot of ground. And we're going to stick with this story through the course of coming weeks and months. And I'm sure we'll get to talk to you again soon. But for now, we'll say thanks very much indeed. Jamie Blackett there, Tonya Buxton alongside me listening to that. Not trying to scaremonger, and Jamie Blackett puts that in context beautifully for us. But it is right to be a little bit nervous, I think.
It is. I mean, but I have a real problem with the way we deal with food in Britain anyway. We eat badly. We don't eat. We eat imported food that's come from the other side of the world, which is nutritionally less good than the stuff that we grow in our gardens. So I read his piece and I thought he was absolutely brilliant. Everything he said was absolutely spot on and perfect. Why are we growing grain to give to cows when the best thing a cow can have is grass? And actually eating meat that's been grass-fed is much better for you than grain-fed. So we've done everything wrong. We've got to rethink it all and start again.
And what I was struck by listening to some farmers last night was that they... there's a way of looking at this that says, it's all Brexit's fault. Look, we wouldn't have had cheap trade deals with Australia, New Zealand, now we've got all this cheap lamb coming in. But they actually were more appalled by what we UK government were replacing the Common Agricultural Policy with, which is this idea of public money for public goods. So instead of growing food, a lot of farmers now are saying, we can't make money out of food. We can't make money out of food. So we'll have solar panels, fine. Or we'll just keep planting trees, loads and loads. You can't eat trees.
No, you can't eat trees, and it's just really not good for us, and it's not good for the soil, and it's not good to not have animals fertilising the soil. Our soil is in trouble, and we need animal fertilisers to do it rather than buying fertilisers from Russia that cost us a fortune and cause a lot more problems with greenhouse gases than animals. We've got to rethink it all.
Tonya, for now, thanks very much indeed. We will revisit this story a few times to come, I'm sure, in coming weeks. That's for sure. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, as many as 250,000 people descending onto the Cheltenham Racecourse area over the next 4 days. Horse racing fans getting their fix. The event is welcoming fans for the first time since the start of the pandemic. We'll bring you that story after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's gone 4:30 and a bit more. Welcome back. You're watching Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on radio. Let's bring the latest news headlines now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Colin. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. NATO's concerned Russia may use chemical weapons in a so-called false flag attack as part of its invasion. Ahead of a meeting with defence ministers tomorrow, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia may attempt to blame any such attack on Ukraine. He says there are hundreds of thousands of forces on high alert, ready to defend the border. The government says a further 350 Russian individuals and organisations have been sanctioned. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the UK is going further and faster than ever, hitting those closest to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. That as President Volodymyr Zelensky warned Western leaders that sanctions aren't enough to end the war. The mayor of Kiev says there'll be a 35-hour curfew in place in the capital from this evening until Thursday morning. It follows large explosions overnight, leaving 2 people dead and residential buildings heavily damaged. Peace negotiations between Moscow and Kiev are currently underway. A Russian court has fined a woman 30,000 rubles, around £215, after finding her guilty of breaking protest laws. Marina Ovsyannikova, the editor of a Russian state TV channel, ran onto the set of a live nightly news show yesterday with a sign reading, "Don't believe propaganda, they're lying to you." The Kremlin had previously described her actions as hooliganism. Boris Johnson says negotiations over the detention of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in Iran are delicate. Hopes have been raised after the 43-year-old's potential release after she reportedly had her British passport returned. The Prime Minister says he doesn't want to tempt fate while negotiations are ongoing. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been detained in Iran since her arrest in 2016 on charges of plotting to overthrow the government, allegations she denies. TV online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News now. It's back to Brazier.
Well, here's the thing. I think this might be the first story we've tackled COVID on in what feels like a week and more, which tells you something, doesn't it? But in Scotland, the SNP today said that if you want to travel on public transport, you still need a mask. North of the border, one person in 18 has COVID. Relatively speaking, it's raging. South of the border, it's hardly abating. 1 in 25 people in England currently, according to the latest figures, have COVID. But of course, if we keep saying cases are not a reflection of hospitalisations, are they? But the rules have relaxed, of course, which may be one reason why we're seeing the infection rates rising. The Boris Johnson government has put the onus on making a decision on individuals and companies when it comes to things like self-isolation. It's prompted some grumbling around the water cooler and the coffee machine. Not everyone is happy to be sharing a workplace, maybe a school, with colleagues who've tested positive for COVID, but who no longer face any legal duty to self-isolate. So what to do? Joining me to debate this here in the studio, Tonya Buxton, and the editor-in-chief of About Time magazine, Angelica Malin. Thanks for joining us, Angelica. It's a subject we've visited in one form or another many times in recent months, if not the last couple of years. I've heard colleagues here grumbling about the new dispensation that puts the onus on the company and individuals. It's no longer a government matter. What say you?
I mean, I think it's pretty crazy to think you can go into work knowing you have COVID and could be spreading it without any ramifications. To me, that's pretty mad.
Tonya, mad or otherwise?
Otherwise.
Tell us why.
It's a cold. Omicron is a cold now. If you don't feel well, you shouldn't go to work. If you feel well, then you should continue. It's a cold. Actually, I'm going to be really controversial here. And if I found out that there was somewhere that there was Omicron, I would suggest to my friends that they take their children there to get lovely natural immunity of this very mild variant, and then it's over and done with.
OK. Angelica?
Can I ask Tonya, have you had Omicron?
Yes.
And you found it to be a mild cold?
Yes, a mild cold. I had the original COVID about 18 months ago, which wasn't so mild. It wasn't very nice at all. And then I got Omicron, and it is literally a cold. There's a bit of a bunged up nose, there's a little bit of sniffles, and it didn't stop me in my stride at all.
OK.
OK, well, I think you personally are quite lucky for that, but that's not the case for everyone.
No, it's not the case for everyone, but it is still a cold now, and we have to carry on living, and we have to look into things of the ramifications of stop living, the ramifications of children not being able to go to school because their teachers aren't there because of the sniffles, the ramifications of operations not happening in hospitals, of diagnosis not continuing in cancers. We have to look at the big picture, not the little sniffles. I mean, we're done with this now. We can see the harms that lockdown did, and we must stop with the lockdown measures. It's a cold. Get on with your life. If you don't feel well, stay in bed. If you do, get up and get to work.
And Angelica, that is now, our elected representatives, at least in England, have come to the conclusion that it's no longer their duty and responsibility to dictate the terms of engagement with COVID that for 2 years it did. And they are saying, and it's almost a point of political philosophy, really, it's up to you. You need now to determine the level of risk. Maybe that's the employer, maybe it's the individual. And I suppose it's brutal, but if an individual doesn't like the company policy that maybe compels them to come to work and sit on a desk next to somebody who knows they've got COVID because they've tested positive, it's kind of tough. They can take their trade elsewhere if you're being absolutely brutal about it.
I mean, I think the government shift towards personal responsibility has been happening for a while. We saw that coming out of the second lockdown. I just think that personally, knowing that people can go around and be spreading it, I think you're slightly downplaying it, calling it a mild cold. Perhaps that was your experience. There's brain scans that have shown that even from mild COVID, your brain can change. I personally think that going out and actively spreading it, choosing to go into a busy workplace and spread it is a really selfish act.
Well, nobody's doing that, are they? Maybe people, it's a sin, surely it's a sin of omission, not a sin of commission. I mean, that's almost suggesting that people they're doing it with malice aforethought, and I don't think anybody's doing that, are they?
We don't know, but leaving it as open-ended as this, I mean, I suppose it comes down to companies creating their own policies here with what's allowable in their workplace. But it also means that people that are clinically vulnerable are having to be forced to stay home more, because if we're having this relaxed attitude that you can go out and be COVID positive and it's just a mild cold, it doesn't matter, it means that lots of people that are vulnerable are stuck at home again, which is also quite selfish. So it's not just about you, it's also about how it affects everyone else.
But can I just say that the vulnerable people have to protect themselves across the board for everything, not just COVID, and they always had. And we've had 2 years of protecting the vulnerable, whereas the unvulnerable have become vulnerable, especially with mental health, because of the actions that we took. So, you know, we have to just take personal responsibility. And I feel very sorry. I have vulnerable people in my family, but I don't expect my children to be stuck inside because of them, because they've got a cold. They've got to get on with their lives. And you get brain scans effects with a common cold as well. So I think that's not really the way to look forward. You've just got to be responsible and do the right thing. And my suggestion is stop testing. We never tested for the common cold. Why are we continuing to test? And the big bugbear for me with testing is this plastic that we all got rid of single-use straws. And now we're using these buckets and buckets of plastic to test all the time. It's just got to stop. We've got to just move on with life and live it and start to be happy and start to try and get back to our happy mental health that we had before, because this drama with COVID is causing a lot more damage.
Angelica, 30 seconds.
But similarly,
You've got the final word.
Cold, you wouldn't want to go into work with that. Yeah, with a common cold, you wouldn't kind of actively encourage someone to go into work with a common cold, with the flu. If you weren't well, you'd stay at home. So I just think we have to be careful here. There's a difference between the common cold and the flu, isn't it? I know you're saying it's not encouraging, but I do think by saying you can go into work with COVID, there is an element that feels a bit encouraging about that perhaps you don't want to stay at home because you don't feel well, and I think you probably should.
Is there not an argument, sorry, I've just said we're going to wrap this up and I've decided we won't, but is there not an argument that says actually, I mean, particularly when you're talking about the common cold, for heaven's sake, that, you know, we can't live in an antiseptic world of total sterility where no infections are passed from one another. I'm not saying I'm necessarily a believer in the infection hypothesis, but we have to occasionally give our immune system a workout, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's had COVID 3 times, I thought having had it the first time, I'd be fine, I'd be immune, and then I caught it, and then I caught it again. So yes, we don't want to live in a totally sterile environment, but I found with COVID, it's easy to get it again and again. So I think there's an element of caution still needed here.
OK. Angelica, thanks very much indeed. Tanya's going to stay with me, but interesting debate, one we might return to. You with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we will go to the Cheltenham Festival. Race fans, welcome back for the first time in 2 years. Stay with us.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, for the first time in 2 years, racing fans back at the Cheltenham Festival in 2020. The festival was seen by some as the last major sporting event to be held with really big crowds before the coronavirus lockdown. And to some degree, it found itself mired in controversy as it was accused by some of being a COVID super spreader event. Last year, it was held behind closed doors, but this year, over 250,000 enthusiastic, that sounds like a euphemism, doesn't it, for something else, and enthusiastic fans will descend on the Gloucestershire racecourse over the coming 4 days. Well, the horse racing presenter and commentator Derek Thompson is one of those who is there, and I'm sure enjoying it thoroughly. Derek, thanks so much for your time. What's it like to be back?
It is absolutely superb, Colin. We've got over 60,000 people here today. It's the opening day. We've had 5 races so far, and the score at the moment is England 3, Scotland 1 and Ireland 1. But of course, the big news is that the Irish horse has won the champion hurdle. We're talking about Honeysuckle. She's made it 15 out of 15. She's incredible. That includes 10 Group 1s. She's won the champion hurdle for the 2nd year running and ridden by Rachel Blackmore. Absolutely incredible. She got the biggest cheer you could probably hear at the studios. Absolutely superb. Honeysuckle has won the champion hurdle for the 2nd year running. And I'm going to rename Honeysuckle and Rachel Blackmore the Queens of Ireland. Absolutely fantastic.
And at times at Cheltenham, in the stands, in the bars, it can feel like you're in Ireland, such as the Irish presence. I just wonder whether this year that is as true. I'm not sure what COVID travel restrictions there are in Ireland, if any. Is it normal?
It is incredible, yes. A lot of Irish people here, but a lot of people from the United Kingdom and Ireland. Now, remember, this is so popular, this meeting, because it hasn't been held for 2 years. If you're staying in a hotel in Cheltenham, I understand a 3-star hotel was charging £800 a night. That shows you how people want to come to the Cheltenham Festival. It is quite simply the World Championships of horse racing. It is superb. If you ask me, Tomo, have you seen many people wearing masks today? I'll have to say no. I haven't wore a mask, and not many people have. So, yeah, and 2 years ago, you know what it was like. It was the last sporting event before COVID really hit. So it is incredible to be back. Everybody's saying, it's great to be back. It's superb. And we've got another 3 days to look forward to, and with the weather set fair, it's looking good.
And it seemed unfair, didn't it, the way that Cheltenham almost became this sort of byword somehow for COVID irresponsibility. How could we have 200,000 people all rubbing shoulders in close proximity just before COVID really bit? The truth is, we just didn't know then what COVID was going to be like. It was business as usual. We could do no other.
Exactly. It was a difficult time for all of us, and we've all been through it since then. It wasn't easy, and I know a number of friends that, in the racing world suffered from COVID after attending Cheltenham 2 years ago. We're keeping our fingers crossed. I talked to the racecourse doctors earlier on, and they seemed very happy. They weren't wearing masks at all or anything like that. So at the moment, it's all systems go, and it's great. And we've had, by the way, Nicky Henderson has had 2 winners. Nico de Boinville, Constitution Hill won the Supreme by 22 lengths, the first race. And I must tell you, there's one for Scotland as well. Lucinda Russell's horse won at 12-1. And she, of course, is the partner of Mr. Peter Scudamore, the former champion jockey. So it was great. So Ireland have only had 1 so far, but they've had the big one, and that's the main thing.
Lovely. It's just lovely. It's on it all, really. Tomo, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll enjoy the rest of the festival.
Anytime.
Very much indeed. Tonya Buxton alongside me to reflect on Cheltenham. Have you ever been to Cheltenham?
I haven't been, no, but I'm smiling because his joy is infectious.
Yeah.
People mixing together again, seeing each other, doing things they like doing. It just makes me happy.
We've gone beyond the point, haven't we, where I think to be in a very large crowd feels odd. As it did for a bit, didn't it? After all the lockdown.
For every moment I didn't have it. So I am a gregarious person. I love crowds. I love bumping into people. Sometimes I go to Soho with a girlfriend of mine. We just walk along just to see the young people having a great time, just because their joy is infectious. I love that. That's what I like about being human, mixing with other humans. So I missed it very much.
Their joy is infectious. Unfortunately, sometimes it was more than just their joy, wasn't it?
More.
I mean, serious subject. We shouldn't make light of it. We're not making light of it.
We're
Just
not.
getting back to
just
life
trying to
after
get back
COVID,
to
aren't we?
normal. And the most important thing that's happened to us at the moment is our mental health. So we must seek joy where we can.
Here. Tonya, for now, thanks very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Well, here's a question for you. Do you procrastinate too much? Is there a clinical solution to it? We'll find out. We hope to find out. We'll try and find out after the break. But first, it's time for a look at the weather.
Hello again. A dry, bright day for many today. Tomorrow will be somewhat different. A duller, wetter day, certainly across much of England and Wales. But most of us will see some sunshine towards the end of the week. Today we've got these weather fronts just gradually encroaching. As I said, for most it's been dry and bright, but this weather front has been bringing a lot of cloud and some rain through the early afternoon across northwest Scotland, west of Northern Ireland, but creeping through the rest of the day into the east of Northern Ireland and towards the central belt of Scotland. So turning soggy here. For the rest of England and Wales, staying fine overnight, maybe just one or two scattered showers across the south. As the rain clears from Northern Ireland, it could turn foggy, and it certainly will turn cold here with a touch of frost in rural areas. For most, though, it's quite a bit milder tonight compared to last night. Quite a lot of cloud, though, to start with on Wednesday. Many places starting dry. The rain edging away from Scotland, but we're looking at a bigger area of rain developing through the morning, perhaps over parts of the Midlands, southern England, and then lingering across eastern England in particular through the afternoon. So quite a wet second half of the day across eastern England. Turning drier through Wales and the southwest. Sunny spells for western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So a brighter day here. Still quite mild in the south, but it won't feel as warm with the clouds and the outbreaks of rain, which will still be pretty heavy during the evening time before that wet weather slowly pushes out into the North Sea as we head into Thursday morning. Following on behind, clear skies will allow a touch of frost in places to start Thursday. For many, it's a bright start, though, with sunny spells. Band of showery rain will cross Scotland and Northern Ireland during the course of the day before that starts to pull away. A bit of patchy rain for North Wales, Northern England for a time, but much of the south and east of England certainly having another sunny day on Thursday. And look at this, from Friday onwards, even into the weekend. Some patchy cloud, but many places looking fine, bright and sunny, although it will be windy along the south coast. Bye for now.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. We all suffer from it from time to time, doing anything and everything to put off a task we know urgently needs doing, procrastination. But might there be a clinical solution to dithering? Well, psychologists say the answer might be, dreaded journalistic formulation that, might be to tackle the dreaded to-do list for 3 minutes, which makes it less overwhelming and more manageable. Most people find it easier to carry on after that, but if not, then the advice is to give up. Let's turn to Dr. Mo Karki, who in his job as a GP and a clinician doesn't have much time for procrastination. You just have to crack on, I suppose, don't you, Doctor? This isn't really... I mean, we're medicalising something that ought not to be medicalised as something here, but it's interesting to hear what medicine has to say on the subject.
Well, it's really interesting because psychologists actually say that procrastination has become a major source of modern-day stress. They say that when we tackle a regular task that we dread, we actually find that it's not as bad as we feared. But when we put it off for days or weeks, we miss out on that success experience of having completed the task, and that increases our stress levels even more. So this new method is really great because that first 3 minutes gets us out of something called the avoidance mindset and makes it much easier to focus on the task in hand and actually supports our mental health. So it's a really nice new method to use.
You grind your way through medical school, you must have... There have been times, I'm sure, you didn't want to knuckle down and face tasks that you could have, dithered about. Are you one of those people who takes the view that if you are going to do it, if you've got a list of things to do, rather than put it off, start with the thing you least want to do? That's quite an effective remedy, I find.
Yeah, there's a concept called swallowing the frog in the morning. So, the thing that you don't want to do, you go and do it straight away and you feel like you've achieved something. But actually what we find is that even that concept is a lot for people nowadays. See the frog, and you find that, I don't really want to tackle this. And in a trial, psychologists found that even looking at a task that we thought would take 20 minutes was too daunting. So what they've done is put it all the way down to 3 minutes. And just by starting that 3-minute task and saying, look, I'll try it for 3 minutes. If I don't like it after 3 minutes, I'll stop. They did this with exercise, found that actually there was such a big success. People found they were improving their fitness and committing more to it. So this is a brilliant new tool. And actually, 3 minutes becomes 6 minutes, becomes 9, becomes half an hour till the task is done. So it's really great for getting out of that procrastination, but also for phobias. And what they found is for someone, for example, who's scared of spiders, has arachnophobia, holding a spider for 3 minutes really helps. If you're shy or have social anxiety, this works as well. So a really good technique to start using. Mo,
I didn't mind swallowing the frog, holding the spider in the hand. You lost me there. Thanks very much indeed. Really fascinating conversation. Mo Karki. Tonya Buxton's alongside me. Procrastinator? Yay or nay?
I am. But I think that's really good, 3 minutes, especially when it comes to the exercise thing. Because one of the biggest things is, OK, I'm going to go and put my leggings on or my running shorts on or whatever. And so if you think, well, I'm only going to do it for 3 minutes, once you've kind of done the first steps of maybe even getting changed, then it makes you go and do it. I think it's a really good idea. I'm going to try it.
I'm keen to... I should have explored it with Mo, but we're running out of time. Why is it, if it is demonstrably true that we are becoming more inclined to procrastination, what is it? Is there something in the culture that's changed? Are we all distracted by other allurements, social media, whatever it is?
I do think it's another kind of collateral damage of COVID and the lockdowns that were imposed.
No, you're not blaming
on
this on COVID.
I blame everything on lockdown, absolutely everything. And I tell you, I can find a way to everything being because of lockdown. But also because we had longer periods at home, we had less set times. So we ceased to kind of try and get those times. And so we kept putting things off. And 2 years of maybe putting things off, we've become less likely to get up and do it.
I agree with most of what you say, Tonya, but definitely not that. Thanks very much indeed. More from Tonya Buxton a little later on. It is just gone 5 o'clock. Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5. Should having an extramarital affair disqualify someone who wants to be a police officer? A senior law enforcement figure says it should. Also, as a member of the House of Lords is ticked off for sleeping through a parliamentary debate, we make the case for napping on the job. And we pay tribute to the celebrity couple who wear their fame lightly. Penny Lancaster and Rod Stewart. She's a special constable, having been a supermodel. He's now taken to fixing potholes on his local road network. Alongside me throughout the next hour, the commentator Tonya Buxton. But first, the headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Colin. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government says a further 350 Russian individuals and organisations have been sanctioned following the invasion of Ukraine. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the UK is going further and faster than ever, hitting those closest to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Foreign Office says those oligarchs sanctioned today have an estimated total wealth of more than £100 billion. It's after President Volodymyr Zelensky warned Western leaders sanctions aren't enough to end the war. Minister for Europe James Cleverly told MPs that the government has now sanctioned a total of 1,000 organisations and individuals.
We owe it to the world to keep the flame of freedom burning and to show that aggression does not pay. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can announce we will go further than ever before by hitting over 360 more people complicit with Putin's regime.
NATO's concerned Russia may use chemical weapons in a so-called false flag attack as part of its invasion. Ahead of a meeting with defence ministers tomorrow, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia may attempt to blame any such attack on Ukraine. He said there are hundreds of thousands of forces on high alert, ready to defend the border.
Now they are making absurd claims about biological labs and chemical weapons in Ukraine. This is just another lie, and we are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons.
Jens Stoltenberg speaking earlier while speaking via video link at a meeting of Northern European leaders. President Volodymyr Zelensky urged them to protect their own security by helping Ukraine defend itself.
You know the kind of weapon we need, everyone knows. You know what kind of defense measures we need. Sanctions are not enough, although we're very grateful for that. So the aggressive plans of Russia has not yet collapsed, and it is understandable why, because the world is silent after 2 nuclear power plants were captured. We're just hearing words, and that's not enough.
Well, the mayor of Kiev says there'll be a 35-hour curfew in the capital from this evening until Thursday morning. Vitaly Klitschko's announcement follows large explosions overnight, leaving 2 people dead and residential buildings heavily damaged. Meanwhile, the besieged city of Mariupol, around 2,000 cars have been able to leave. That's according to officials. Peace negotiations between Moscow and Kiev resumed today after being paused yesterday. Mr. Klitschko says there's a huge number of injured people in hospitals.
We will defend our city. It's our homes. We never think to leave. It's our homes. We defend our children, family, our buildings, our city, and our future of Ukraine.
An Irish cameraman has been killed near Kiev. Fox News announced that war zone photographer Pierre Zagshevsky died yesterday after his vehicle was struck by incoming fire. He was reporting with another Fox News journalist, Benjamin Hall, who's currently in hospital. A Ukrainian journalist is also believed to have been killed in the attack. It follows the death of another American journalist, Brett Renaud, who was shot and killed near Kiev on Sunday. An anti-war protester who interrupted a live news program on Russian state television has avoided a jail sentence. Channel 1 editor Marina Ovsyannikova held up a sign behind the presenter saying, "They're lying to you." A Russian court has fined her 30,000 rubles, around £215, after finding her guilty of breaking protest laws. Downing Street has called her demonstration an incredibly brave act. The Kremlin dismissed it as hooliganism. Face coverings will remain compulsory on public transport and enclosed public spaces in Scotland. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's announced she'll not relax the rules on masks due to a current spike in case numbers. The legal requirement for businesses to retain customer contact details will be dropped as planned. The restrictions will be reviewed again in 2 weeks' time. Boris Johnson says negotiations over the detention in Iran of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe are delicate. Hopes have been raised about the 43-year-old's potential release after she reportedly had her British passport returned to her. The Prime Minister, though, says he doesn't want to tempt fate while negotiations are ongoing. Ms. Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been detained in Iran since her arrest in 2016 on charges of plotting to overthrow the government, allegations she denies. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Brazier.
Well, coming up a little later on this hour, we will pay tribute to the celebrity couple who wear their fame lightly, that is Penny Lancaster and Rod Stewart. She, a special constable, having been a supermodel. As you know, he's now taken to fixing potholes on his local road network. But first, what is the price, I should say, of principle? Let me put that question another way. If you want to keep the lights on, keep your car on the road, maybe even have a hot shower, keep the central heating on, maybe you also have to accept that the fuel that makes all those things possible cannot come from an ethical source, at least not always. Tonight, Boris Johnson is flying to Saudi Arabia, and he wants the Gulf state to increase production of oil and gas, which would make the price go down. But Mr. Johnson, or will Mr. Johnson, as he pleads for Saudi generosity, also mention Saudi cruelty, mention the fact that, for instance, on Saturday, 81 men were beheaded there, some of whom were killed under the country's medieval penal laws for deviant behaviour, as they describe it. Let's turn to a senior research fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College. That is Malcolm Grimston. Malcolm Grimston, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. If we didn't do deals with regimes that didn't always pass the sniff test, the lights wouldn't be on in this country, would they?
Yes, I mean, we're looking particularly at oil with Saudi Arabia, which is not so much connected with electricity, but gas still produces well over a third of our total electricity. We produce less than half of that from our own resources here. We import the rest, most of it from Norway, which is a friendly country where relations have been good for many centuries, actually. But some of it inevitably from Russia. And of course, we're also dependent on the price of gas, which is very much influenced by Russian gas coming into Europe.
We're talking to Peter Tatchell, Malcolm, at the top of the last hour. He said, look, we don't have to do these grubby deals with onerous regimes, or at least we do. We need a sort of hierarchy of just how toxic they are. And he said, look, we should be using Venezuela more. Not ideal, but better than Saudi Arabia. I just wonder, given how dominant the Saudi Arabian footprint is when it comes to producing oil, whether that is a choice that you can actually exercise.
Well, yes, to an extent we can. And indeed, America, which has had an embargo on Venezuelan oil for some time, is revising that at the moment in view of the current situation with Russia and Ukraine. But there's no silver bullet with this. The world uses extraordinary amounts of oil. Russia is the second biggest exporter of oil, third biggest producer of oil. And to take Russia off the system, we would need several Venezuelas and United Arab Emirates who are talking about increasing their output. Iraq is talking about increasing its output. But to replace that amount of oil in the world, there is, I guess, Saudi Arabia can probably replace some of it as well. But even if Saudi massively ratchets up its output, we haven't in the short term got enough oil capacity in the world to deal with Russia. Now, after the big oil price shocks of the 1970s, over the course of the subsequent decade, the world did move enormously on energy. We invested a lot in nuclear, coal had something of a revival, gas became the new kid on the block, and by the end of the 1980s, the oil price was back at the sort of levels it had been at the beginning of the 1970s. That's a project that takes years rather than months.
I forget whether one of the papers anyway over the weekend I was reading, talking about the story we're familiar with now, going past the forecourt, doing a double take because you can't quite believe the price you've seen. But this story, and it hasn't really been followed up, and I wonder what you made of it, was suggesting that diesel, we've got a particular problem with diesel supplies, and we could be looking in coming weeks or months at rationing. Is that a possibility?
Yes, I mean, you remember, it's not so many months since we had the scare stories about petrol and diesel at the pumps, and the petrol stations were rationing at that stage. They were limiting the amount that any individual customer could buy. So we have very recent experience of that. Clearly, we're in a different world, and this will be at a different level of concern. But yes, whenever we're in a position, unfortunately, we do tend to get into these sort of panic buying cycles as a nation, and we've seen this a number of times over the years in various fields. And in those circumstances, rationing as a relatively short-term measure probably makes sense. If it were to become longer term, then so be it. The country has had many years of rationing in the post-war period. I hope we're not in that situation. We're certainly not in that situation yet. But it's a sensible way of managing a limited resource until we can get the alternatives flowing.
Malcolm Grimston, as ever, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. The commentator Tonya Buxton is alongside me. The point, and actually Malcolm Grimston makes it there, is about expediency. We've talked in the last hour, let's consider fracking, let's consider reopening some of or forging ways into those new oil fields in the North Sea that are a little bit marginal. That takes years. Mm-hmm. You can go to the Saudis, as Boris Johnson is tonight, and say, please, could you turn the taps right on? Because that will force and depress the price. And that would happen within days.
Yes, it would. But like you said, at what cost? 81 men lost their lives. They were executed in some medieval manner.
They're not the only country that executes people.
They are not, but they're the ones that we're trying to do business with, and they're the ones that are raining hell on Yemen at the moment. They're doing lots of things up we do not consider to be civilised behaviour. And so when we're bargaining deals with them, and we've sold them lots of arms in order to do that, what they're doing to Yemen. So the hypocrisy is so entrenched. I don't know the answer. I just wish that we had just stopped having knee-jerk reactions to things and be better prepared.
Yeah, on that, I think a lot of people would agree. Tonya, for now, thanks very much. Now, after last night's show, I went home and logged on to a Zoom meeting. It was organised by a group of concerned farmers. They came from a wide range of agricultural backgrounds. Some worked lots of land, some hardly none at all. Some were organic, some were intensive. What united them all was a belief that Britain is effectively sleepwalking into a food crisis. We only grow about half the food we consume. And as events in Ukraine have reminded us, importing produce is not always easy or even possible. But this isn't just about events abroad. Many of the farmers I was listening to last night are angry at what they see as self-inflicted wounds, that Britain's food security is being undermined by trade deals with countries like Australia, that they are being encouraged to plant environmentally sensitive crops, or not crops, I should say, things like trees. Well, we're joined by Andrew Ward, MBE, an arable farmer from Lincolnshire who has crept in there under the cover of darkness while I was reading. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. How are you finding things at the moment? Well, one thing that really struck me yesterday, listening to a dairy farmer, he was saying that he's getting, I think it was 38p, does that sound right, a litre for milk? But he did point, and that's a rise of 10p in a year, and you think, hurrah, but then he's pointed out that his costs had risen by more than that in the same period.
Exactly, and this is the problem we have. In that one of the main things we need as an arable farmer myself, or as livestock farmers, is fertiliser, and nitrogen fertiliser in particular, because arable farmers need it for our crops to grow, livestock for the grass to grow. And when you have fertiliser increases, last year it was around about £240 per tonne for 1 tonne of 34.5% nitrogen, and today we're being quoted now £1,000 per tonne. And we just cannot sustain those type of increases.
And it's not just things like that. We were just talking about oil. One of the farmers last night was saying his tractor does about five miles to the gallon.
Well, I mean, yes, it's difficult to quote in miles to the gallon because we look at litres per hectare with fuel.
Oh, don't be difficult.
And a hectare's 2.5 acres. But yeah, and I mean, I have a tractor at home that holds 1,800 litres of fuel. So when you're filling that up last year, as we did, at about 45 pence per litre.
With the red diesel.
With the red diesel, of course. And today, that red diesel now has gone to about £1.10 a litre. And so the problem we have is our red diesel's gone up something like 260%, and yet diesel at the pumps has only risen about 25%. And I can't work it out because red diesel is white diesel with a red dye added to it and some tax removed, yet we're all of a sudden paying this massive increase, somebody is ripping us off somewhere.
Can we just talk about food security? We've moved from the Common Agricultural Policy, which was based on this recognition that it wasn't always profitable to farm, but golly, you need food. And are we now moving to a situation where this government's decided, actually, the good times will roll forever? We can import cheap lamb from New Zealand. It doesn't matter that in North Wales we're planting trees rather than having sheep. And it seems to be based on this sort of wishful idea that actually peace and harmony will reign supreme forever. There'll never be an interruption to supply chains. We'll never have problems getting the food into the ports.
You are quite right, and this is the problem we have. It's government policy now is driving a lot of this, and its government policy has been wrong for not just a little while, a long while. And yes, the Ukraine issue is not helping things now, but let's get this straight. Food security and food issues have been going on for a long, long while, and they've been brushed under the carpet. And it takes something like this, which is an absolute catastrophe, yes, we know, to bring it out in the open. And the problem we have is that food has been too cheap for too long. That is the problem.
Tonia's nodding because as a food writer of many years and standing, you get it. But are people, we come back to the whole question, are people prepared to pay more?
Well, they'll just have to suck it up and do it, don't they? Because that's the right thing to do. It's what's been happening with our food and our farms is just completely wrong. And it's exactly the same thing. We want to look like we're all rainbow and lovely for the green agenda, but we're importing lamb from New Zealand. How much does that cost to come over? And what's the green cost to that? And we don't want to get our oil. We're getting oil from somewhere else. And how much does that cost? Nobody's looking at the big picture. It's just ridiculous.
And Andrew, you see people now in Lincolnshire, you're from.
That's right.
Are you seeing people moving in there who are not traditional farmers, as it were, but they want to buy the land and enjoy some of the the public money for public good, as the agriculture bill puts it? In other words, opening up access, maybe planting some hedgerows, planting trees. Are you starting to see that?
We're not seeing people move in to do that, but it's government policy is strangling what we want to do in producing food in the only way that we know, to maximise production so that we don't have these issues. But it's government policy that is forcing us to do other things. And I mean, this latest thing that you've just mentioned about the public money for public goods and all that, they're now saying they want, by 2040, they want to remove an area the size of Lancashire from producing food and put it into trees and rewilding it. What planet are they on? And that area, for listeners and watchers, just to note that, it is the equivalent of 420,000 football pitches. Completely removed. Now, we are told that it's not valuable agricultural land or prime crop producing land like maybe some of mine is in Lincolnshire, but that's not the point. It is areas of land that maybe livestock are grazing, sheep in the hills, that is producing food, wholesome food for our country without importing it.
And we're almost out of time. I just wonder if the farming community has got their message across, and in particular in this regard, do you think people really know that we actually only produce half of the food that we consume in this country? And if they did know that, do you think they'd be quite so nonchalant about where our food comes from?
I think that is the problem. Food is taken for granted. How we produce it while caring for the environment, for nature. We don't just apply plant protection products and poison everything. We have to leave our farm for our next generation. So we need to protect that and what we do and how we grow food. And I think the problem is that the public aren't fully aware of what goes into producing food.
Andrew Ward, we appreciate you coming in, because I know most of your time you're in Lincolnshire, but
Yes,
we've caught you in London today, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, moving on, who do you trust to keep the peace in your community? How do we decide who is fit to be a police officer? Well, two stories today which raise this one important question. One comes from Boss of the Independent Office for Police Conduct. He thinks extramarital affairs should potentially disqualify someone from being recruited. The other story about the way we choose would-be police officers comes from Mike Fuller. Mike Fuller is the Chief Constable of the Kent Force and Britain's only black officer in so senior a role. He says it's time for the UK to embrace American-style positive discrimination, where the police have to meet quotas for the numbers of non-white officers who serve. So two very different approaches, but addressing the same question. Who do we choose to police our lives? Joining me, the former Metropolitan Police Officer, Chris Hobbs, who's also just crept into the studio there by the magic of television. Chris, let's just break this down into those two stories. We've got a senior figure within the law enforcement community saying that when you look at somebody's recruitment, you look at their things like what's happening online, you look at their, I think it's probably fair to describe it as their moral probity, whether they've had affairs. I mean, it sounds a little bit Victorian, and it begs a question, I suppose some might say, well, if they can't be trusted by their spouse, can they be trusted by the public?
Well, yes, I do think it's a bit intrusive. I think there's a lot of concern actually in the police service about recruitment, retention, training and vetting. Now, what maybe will be the solution is to actually increase the level of vetting. I was vetted, I obviously joined the police, but I was vetted to a high level when in the police.
Just break it down for us. What does it mean? Do they talk to your family? I mean, how deep does it go?
Well, if you're DV'd, which if you get into, say, a security type role, then it's very intrusive. They will look at your bank account, they will look at your private life, they want to know what girlfriends you've had, what mistresses you've had. They look at your references, they look at your referees. They really do strip you bare. Now,
it's right, they should do that, isn't it? We want to know who's...
That's right, but this is at a high level. So the argument surely will be not extramarital affairs, but when officers apply for the police, that the vetting be to that much higher level than it is now. That would presumably cater for some of the concerns of the IOPC and perhaps members of the public. So you really do go into that officer's background, and it is quite intrusive, but that costs money and it takes a lot of time. So whether the Home Office is prepared to fund that somehow, I doubt.
Just before we move on to the question of positive discrimination, which is a much bigger topic and it doesn't just apply to the police, Tonya, any thoughts you've got about this question of personal morality?
Well, firstly, I think that money that would be very well spent, wouldn't it? If the Home Office put that money into vetting, that would be very well spent, because then we don't get the wrong people into the jobs, which will cost a lot more money in the long run. And I do have a sense of morality. I mean, exactly as you said, if your spouse can't trust you, how can you be trusted with anything else? I mean, I'm absolutely for that. And I think that we live in a society that should be promoting that, promoting being honest and decent. That's what I expect from my policemen. I expect you to be honest and decent and have high morals.
So that's one aspect of the who becomes police officer story. The other aspect, I mentioned Mike Fuller, Chief Constable at Kent Police. This is a really vexed question about quotas and positive discrimination in America, affirmative action they call it, hugely controversial because of course it's saying to somebody, you can have this prized position, pays really well, great pension, etc. You're not necessarily fully qualified for it, but you fit other measurements.
Yeah, I mean, I would be personally in favour of that. I know Mike Fuller, he was a big boss when I was a DS, and I like the guy. I don't think this is the answer, to be quite honest, in terms of quotas. Anyone who comes in on a quota, for example, perhaps would meet lower standards than your average recruit. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I think in terms of getting more black officers in, I don't know a police officer, serving or retired, who doesn't want to see more black police officers in the force, in the Met. But at the moment, the biggest obstacle is really the problems they face from within their own community. Because if you're constantly told that the police are racist, for example, they're antagonistic towards black people, stop and search, etc., and there's hostility to them from sections of the black community, the activists that we all know, are you then going to join the police? And I think it's more encouragement that you need from those people, those activists, to get more black officers in who meet the same standards, but possibly are really put off by the animosity they receive. And we saw it at Black Lives Matter protests, the abuse black officers got from protesters, shocked their white colleagues, shocked senior officers, and that you get that abuse when they're out on the streets as well. So that's something I think that will put off all but the bravest person who might want to be a police officer, but to overcome all those obstacles, to face that abuse from your own community, is asking an awful lot. And I think that is what has to be overcome to get more black officers into the Met and into other forces.
Chris Hobbs, you raised some really important questions there. Tonya, just give you 30 seconds on quotas, positive discrimination. Does it work for you?
I don't believe in positive discrimination, but I do believe that these activists and these groups that have such loud voices should be the ones that should be educated into getting more young black and Asian men to be part of the police force.
OK, it's a question we'll come back to, I'm sure, but for now, Chris Hobbs, really appreciate you coming in. Thanks very much indeed. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we'll be joined by the Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation. Used to work for a Chinese leader who'll join me from Beijing. He says we can't rule out the threat of nuclear warfare from Russia. It's not a particularly cheery subject, but there's none more important. We'll be back in a moment with that.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 28 minutes past the hour of 5 with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. American officials have said that they suspect China has already decided to provide Russia with economic and financial support for its war on Ukraine. They also believe Beijing is pondering whether it should send military supplies, things like armed drones. Well, my next guest previously worked closely with the former Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping. He says we should not write off, I hate to say these words, this is what he said, we should not write off the threat of nuclear warfare with Russia. I suppose it's a statement of the obvious at one level, isn't it? And he is the Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation, Victor Gao, who joins me. Victor Gao, thanks so much for your time. What is your warning to the West?
Well, I would say this war in Ukraine is a tragedy, especially for the people in Ukraine. All the parties involved, directly or indirectly, need to do their utmost to de-escalate the tension in Ukraine, to bring the war to an end as quickly as possible, to save as many people in Ukraine as possible. Russia has put its nuclear forces on special alert, and the United States, even though without saying that, has always put their nuclear weapons on high alert. So I would say mankind has never been as close to the brink of a nuclear disaster as we are now, even though lots of people, lots of countries seem to pretend that this is not the case. But wake up, this is the reality. If we take any step in the wrong direction, we may push the situation beyond the point of no return. And when a nuclear disaster happens, it's no child's play. It will wipe out humankind or Homo species from the face of Earth.
And sadly, Victor Gao, we can see the steps that take us to the kind of Armageddon that you're describing. You can imagine a situation. I was discussing it with a colleague only yesterday, and we were thinking back to the Vietnam War when the Americans started bombing in Cambodia. to disrupt the supply lines for the Viet Cong. You could see a situation here where the Russians start bombing just across the border, maybe into Poland or Hungary, targeting weapons being sent by NATO forces to Ukrainian allies. You can see how that would start something that then ratchets up step by step to somewhere we really do not want to go.
Exactly. I think each or all parties involved in this war may actually take a wrong step in the wrong direction, or they may make miscalculations or misjudge the real intention of the other side. Regardless of all this, I think the true question is whether the war, which is now conventional in Ukraine, may get out of control and deteriorate or degenerate into a nuclear war. Now, if the nuclear war happens, it will really be the largest menace to the survival of humanity ever in human history. And no one can afford to make any wrong mistake. And there will be no winner if there is a nuclear holocaust, and all mankind will be losers. So let's be serious, let's wake up, let's do whatever we can to avoid pouring more fuel onto the fire in Ukraine. Let's save as many people in Ukraine as possible. I would say it is indecent to push the people in Ukraine to fight and to die.
Well, Victor Gao, we have to be careful. We have to be very careful. It's up to the people of Ukraine to decide how long they want to fight for. It's up to the people of Ukraine whether they want to parley away bits of their territory to secure a peace. That's a separate question. We haven't really got time for that now. I'm curious about this point. We all live, as you say, on the same planet that would be affected by a nuclear holocaust. We know with some certainty, don't we, that if there is anybody on the planet who Vladimir Putin is willing to listen to, it is Xi Jinping. If anybody's got the capacity to pick up the phone and say, stop this now, it's Xi Jinping, will he pick up the phone?
It is true that China has good relations with Russia on the one hand and with Ukraine on the other hand. And it is a rare commodity right now for a major country to have good relations with both Russia on the one hand and Ukraine on the other hand. Now, even though Russia and Ukraine are fighting off this war in Ukraine, Ukraine really has the United States and NATO member states behind it. So in a sense, philosophically speaking, Ukraine is a proxy for the United States and NATO. This is very unfortunate. This really puts the people in Ukraine into this big binder between Russia on the one hand and the United States and NATO on the other hand behind Ukraine. This unfortunate situation needs to be corrected as quickly as possible because otherwise it may degenerate into a nuclear catastrophe.
Victor Gao, we appreciate your time, and I ought to say that though many people I think would agree with your analysis, it says nobody wants to embrace the prospects of a nuclear war, that many Ukrainians would resist the idea that they are a proxy for NATO or indeed America. Victor Gao, thanks very much indeed for your time. We are going to bring you the latest news bulletin next.
Thank you, Colin. It's 5:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The government says a further 350 Russian individuals and organisations have been sanctioned. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the UK is going further and faster than ever, hitting those closest to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. That as President Volodymyr Zelensky warned Western leaders that sanctions aren't enough to end the war. NATO's concerned Russia may use chemical weapons in a so-called false flag attack as part of its invasion. Ahead of a meeting with defence ministers tomorrow, Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia may attempt to blame any such attack on Ukraine. He says there are hundreds of thousands of forces on high alert, ready to defend the border. The mayor of Kiev says there'll be a 35-hour curfew in place in the capital from this evening until Thursday morning. It follows large explosions overnight, leaving 2 people dead and residential buildings heavily damaged. Peace negotiations between Moscow and Kiev resumed today. An anti-war protester who interrupted a live news programme on Russian state television has avoided a jail sentence. Channel 1 editor Marina Ovsyannikova held up a sign behind the presenter saying, "They're lying to you." A Russian court has fined her 30,000 rubles, around £215, after finding her guilty of breaking protest laws. Boris Johnson says negotiations over the detention of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in Iran are delicate. Hopes have been raised about the 43-year-old's potential release after she reportedly had her British passport returned. The Prime Minister says he doesn't want to tempt fate while negotiations are ongoing. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been detained in Iran since her arrest in 2016 on charges of plotting to overthrow the government. Allegations she denies. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Brazier will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We hadn't spent a lot of time focusing on Ukraine today. Actually, we talked about it with the last guest, didn't we? And we're going to do it with our next guest as well. And I'll say this, on the latest episode of my weekly podcast, my guest was Peter Hitchens. And Peter said that the West's reaction to Ukraine's invasion proves, in his view, that those on the left in politics are really effectively the belligerent parties, the party of war, those on the left, he said. Well, I don't think my next guest demurs from that view. Joining me from New York is the author and contributing editor of The American Conservative, that is Sohrab Ahmari. Sohrab Ahmari, thanks for your time, as ever, appreciate it. Peter Hitchens strongly of the view that 20 years ago, actually longer, he would say, the late 1960s, to be on the left was to be giving peace a chance, John Lennon marching against war in Vietnam, all the rest of it. Something fundamentally has changed.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Although I will say this: the question is whether you're talking about the left within the establishment, within the liberal establishment, what I call the uniparty. Right? You have the center left and center right on both sides of the Atlantic. In Europe, in the United States, and in Britain, you have had this consensus liberal order. And if that's what you mean by the left, I guess, then no, I don't think Peter's right. But if you mean that anti-establishment left, that also has become shockingly pro-war. In other words, 20 years ago in the ramp up to the Iraq War, you'll remember massive protests against war and escalation, artists, intellectuals, Stop the War Coalition, so on and so forth. That's been quite muted now. Somehow, that liberal kind of establishment has also managed to silence, for the most part, the oppositional left that you used to think of as anti-war, so that you have a scene like we did in New York City recently, where at the Guggenheim Museum, lots of artists gathered and they threw paper airplanes from the sort of the balconies of the Guggenheim Museum. But you would think that's an anti-war protest. It wasn't. They were calling for a no-fly zone, which is, as your previous guest, Dr. Gao, pointed out, is a recipe for a catastrophic confrontation with nuclear Russia. So this turn of events is very interesting to me, that the anti-war voices of 20 years ago are so muted now, if they can be heard at all.
That's such an image, Saurabh. That's such an image of the paper airplanes being used in that way. What's driven it? What has led to this reorientation where people you'd expect to be, and would certainly see themselves profoundly as humanitarians, people who hate the idea of unlicensed violence, and yet actually now seem to be, in certain sectors, the keenest on bloodletting and the most belligerent?
I think there's several factors. One is the fact that, at least in the United States, you have a Democrat in power. And so a lot of the mainstream media sees itself as duty bound to align with whatever the government, if it's a center-left government, is calling for. That's part of it. But I think that the deeper fact is that for about a decade, but especially for the past 5-6 years, there has been a kind of popular uprising against the post-Cold War order. One manifestation of it was the Brexit vote in Britain in 2016. Another was the rise of Donald Trump in the United States. Across the developed world, parties that question globalization, parties that question the settlement we got after the Cold War, immigration and so forth, have been coming to power, and the elite used Russia in an attempt to paint all of that opposition to the kind of global order post-Cold War as Russian stooges, as Kremlin bots, as brainwashed, as people on the payroll of Moscow. And so there's been this kind of structural narrative built into how the elites think about these issues. And so once you have an actual Russian invasion, it's an easy way, first of all, to silence their domestic enemies, because you basically hang Vladimir Putin's aggression around the necks of all populists, left populists, right populists, anyone who stands against the kind of elite consensus. So it's very useful in that sense for them. And they've been sort of hyping themselves up so much about Russia that now they have this moment where, from their point of view, I think they not only unseat a regime, which, by the way, is unsavory in many ways. I'm talking about Vladimir Putin's regime. Not only unseat him, but to really sort of put the boot down against the movement toward populism that you saw, again, across the developed world beginning in 2015-16.
It feels like there's a lot of truth in that. It feels like there's a lot of truth in the idea that Putin, but brackets Russia, became this sort of global panto villain. And with all panto villains, you only see one aspect. And again, before people start emailing in and saying, you know, you're defending the regime, this is not to defend the regime at all. It's vile, it's disgusting, it's pernicious, it's evil, it deserves no military spoils from Ukraine, it only deserves defeat. But ultimately, that's for the Ukrainian people to decide. Sorry, just to deviate a little bit, we've got time for one more answer. I'm glad you listened to what Victor Gao had to say from that Chinese perspective. Were you struck as I was? And I don't know to what extent he speaks on behalf of anybody more official and senior in Beijing, but I note that he was a former advisor to Deng Xiaoping. Do you sense that the Chinese are alarmed about what's happening in Russia, and that ultimately they are the people who may be able to bring this to some less than bloody conclusion?
Well, I mean, what I've heard is that his think tank is close to at least some of the sort of state apparatus in China. So it's a coup for you, Colin, because that was an interesting and important interview. And yes, here in the United States, the Center for the National Interest, which is also a think tank, has done a wargaming, algorithmic scenarios, and they predict a 40% chance of a war in the case of a kind of direct NATO-Russia confrontation. So this stuff is very, very serious. And I have to say, not only, okay, the typical hawks in Britain and the US are acting as they would, very irresponsibly, hot-headed, but also some of these countries, I have great respect, for example, for Duda in Poland and others, insofar as they're trying to revive a kind of conservative populist tradition. But everyone needs to calm down a little bit. Everyone needs to calm down a little bit. I mean, they're going apocalyptic, and you corner someone like Vladimir Putin with the buttons that he controls, the nuclear buttons that he controls, and give him this sense that there is no option for him in the world, right? You corner someone like that, and you can see him escalating to this unspeakable point. And it's just astonishing to me that everyone is calling for ever more escalation without taking the warnings of someone like Dr. Gao into account.
Sarah Bamari, it's a sobering conversation, but an enlightening one, I think. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Sarah Bamari there. Tonya Buxton alongside me, as depressed, I imagine, as many of our viewers are at a little bit of what we're ventilating.
Yes, I mean, I really am. But it's like you said, the world has gone mad. When you've got people like Facebook saying it's OK to have hate against a soldier, any soldier. I'm a mother, so, you know, that's...
Any Russian soldier?
Any Russian soldier, yes. But as a mother of young boys, so if my 18-year-old was conscripted and sent off to war, in a war that's insane and should never be happening, how is it OK for then Facebook to say it's all right to give them hate? It's the people on top, it's Putin that needs to be given any hate, not individual young soldiers.
But you know what some people will say, listening to our conversation now, Tonya, they'll say, well, there they go, they're being apologists for this vile regime.
I would never apologise for a vile regime. I'm frightened. After what we've just heard, you've escalated my fear, and I told you I'm in the pursuit of joy, and you've escalated my fear to the extent that we, like you said, if Putin starts to feel that he's got nowhere else to go and he is a despot, what will stop him from pushing the button? We have to try and communicate with this man and find a way of speaking to him. It should never have got to this to start with.
We've talked to Sarah before, and he certainly takes the view, and I think many of our viewers will do as well, that actually he's not necessarily a fan of Joe Biden, but Joe Biden's decision not to augment the supply of jets into this conflict may have been, history will tell, quite a decisive moment. We'll maybe come back to that some other time. We're going to leave Ukraine behind for now, at least for a little bit. A Labour member of the House of Lords was ticked off for falling asleep in the debating chamber. This was Lord Young of Norwood Green, who wanted to take part in a debate about genetically modified organisms late yesterday evening. It didn't go to plan.
Given that we have the lowest uptake of organic farming in Europe, this is extremely worrying. We should be encouraging organics, not jeopardising them with secret GM field trials. The explanatory memorandum refers to upcoming wider reform, but provides no information on what the government plans are for this wider reform. Nor does it provide any guidance, which is alleged to come from ACRE shortly.
Gene editing.
I'm sorry. But the Noble Lord was fast asleep for the entire duration of the Minister's speech. He really should not participate in this debate, having failed to take advantage of the ability to hear it. I'm afraid the Noble Lord was fast asleep for the entirety of the Minister's opening speech. Well, I had to send a note to you in order to wake you up by the doorkeeper.
Wow. Let's turn to the independent peer Baroness Kate Hoey, who joins us now. Kate Hoey. Does it happen often that people are sent notes to wake them up before they get to speak?
Well, no, actually, in my time, in my shortish time, the last couple of years in the Lords, I haven't really seen anyone actually fall asleep. What you do see a lot of is peers, and it happens also in the House of Commons, leaning backwards because there are microphones in the back of the seat. And sometimes you will see people that they look, like they're sleeping. But clearly, Lord Young, who I'm very fond of, actually, and I feel really sorry for him because he's now hit the headlines for something that I'm sure he would be quite embarrassed about. Obviously it was quite late at night. He'd obviously waited quite a while. And he was spotted really genuinely sleeping, I think. And that's what caused the minister to intervene. And then when he tried to say no, she was able to point out that she'd actually sent one of the attendants to wake him up. No, it doesn't happen very often. Thanks.
Do you think she was? Do you think she was within her rights to say you have forfeit the right to speak because you were snoozing? I mean, it may have had fully formed views. It didn't need to.
I think because it was so late and probably there weren't many others to speak, that she thought she would kind of get away with that. But reality, she didn't have, any right to actually stop him speaking. The House of Lords is very different from the Commons, in that the Commons is a speaker who makes lots of these kind of formal decisions. But in the House of Lords, it's self-regulating. And therefore, if there'd been a lot of members there surrounding him from the Labour side, they probably would have made a protest. But it was late at night. And I think it's one of these things where, if you want to speak, you have to be there from the very beginning. You have to listen to all the speeches and you have to wait before you leave until all the speeches are over. So I think probably Lord Young had maybe just had enough that evening.
Enough of what remains unclear. But
no, I wasn't suggesting that he had any alcohol.
No, but it's an occupational hazard in politics.
It is embarrassing.
No, it's an occupational hazard in politics, isn't it? That, it's the nature of both chambers that often sittings will go on into certainly used to be the case, the wee small hours.
Yes, and I think it is something. I mean, I'm surprised in the Lords because we don't start until 2:30 any day, and on a Wednesday we don't start till 3 o'clock. And quite often with some of the bills, particularly the long bills, there's so many amendments because the Lords can put as many amendments as they like, and the amendments can be there were some debates where they've been going on to 1 o'clock in the morning, and by then any votes there are that happen, they've gone right down to less than 200 people, sometimes less than 100 people. So I think I personally think it'd be more sensible to start as we do on a Thursday morning, much earlier, and finish at a reasonable time.
Kate Hoey, we've got to leave it there, but really appreciate your insights as ever. Thanks very much indeed, Baroness Kate Hoey there. Rock star Rod Stewart was sufficiently fed up waiting for his local council to fill in the potholes outside his Essex estate that he decided to do it himself. The 77-year-old singer posted videos of him shoveling gravel, saying, "I'm repairing the street near where I live because no one can be bothered to do it." Rod Stewart said people were bashing their cars up, and also that he couldn't get his Ferrari along the lane in its existing condition. Well, Rod Stewart's sense of public duty is not unique even within his own family. His wife, Penny Lancaster, recently made her first arrest as a special constable with the City of London Police, a police volunteer, in other words. Joining me now, the commentator Angela Epstein, to reflect on the big society, Angela, and the fact that, here's a couple who wear their fame lightly getting stuck in.
Well, yes, and I have a lot in common with Rod Stewart. I mean, apart from evidently being an international rock star, is that we've been plagued with potholes where I live too. I haven't struggled getting Lamborghinis and Ferraris down the road though. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I love the fact that this couple are sleeves up, let's get stuck in. Rod Stewart, like many people all over the country, it's nice to see that these kind of rock gods also have the same problems as us. I wonder if he has problems getting a Tesco delivery slot as well. But he could be a champion of all sorts of things. But it is a quite serious issue here because our roads are in a terrible state. And Rod has said, right, I'm getting in the boys and I'm sorting it myself. I don't know who the boys are, by the way, that are referred to in the various pieces of coverage.
And whether he's paid them to help him out, it's difficult to know, isn't it? But it's a point I often make about the monarchy, and I make the point to defend the monarchy when I say to people, look, they've got this sense of noblesse oblige. They know they're very lucky. They've got all this money. They could be sitting on their backsides doing that, but they actually do offer this public service. I'm not likening Rod Stewart and Penny Lancaster to royalty, but there is that sense in which they feel that life's been quite good to them. They'll do something back.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very benevolent view, and I'm sure that's the case. I mean, Rod, we're not really on first name terms, but for the sake of for the purposes of the tape, he has struggled to get his car down the road. So I don't know whether there is a flavour of self-interest in all that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he's done what loads of people, maybe without the money or resources, have been able to do, and said, look, I'm going to fix it myself. But I did have a chat with a lawyer about this afternoon, who advised that people shouldn't go around fixing potholes in their streets if they want to do the Rod thing. The reason being is that obviously they can't do it maybe to the level that a council could do it. They're not trained. If somebody has an accident, the route leads back to the perpetrator.
You fix it, you own it. That's the way the lawyers would see it. Angela Epstein, so good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much for your time. Thanks a lot. Tonya Buxton alongside me, 30 seconds to reflect on Rod Stewart and Penny Lancaster. Go.
Lovely people. How lovely are they? That's what I can say. I mean, he's got the money. He's gone to fix it. He did it for his cars, because, these low sports cars, and he did it for that. So good for him. And Penny Lancaster, what a heroine. What an amazing woman.
And I've talked to a couple of people who sort of know through, through some distance, who say, it's not for the publicity.
No.
It wasn't to be seen in the papers. It's for real. Yeah. She wanted to make a contribution.
She's working on her own soul. She feels that she wants to give back something. She's had a lovely life, and she wants to give something back. And she's 6'2". I'd love to bump into her when she's on the...
There are worse people to be nicked by.
Yes.
Buxton, thanks very much indeed. Michelle Dewberry's next. Do stand by.
Hello again. A dry, bright day for many today. Tomorrow will be somewhat different. A duller, wetter day, certainly across much of England and Wales. But most of us will see some sunshine towards the end of the week. Today we've got these weather fronts just gradually encroaching. As I said, for most it's been dry and bright, but this weather front has been bringing a lot of cloud and some rain through the early afternoon across northwest Scotland, west of Northern Ireland, but creeping through the rest of the day into the east of Northern Ireland and towards the central belt of Scotland. So turning soggy here. For the rest of England and Wales, staying fine overnight, maybe just one or two scattered showers across the south. As the rain clears from Northern Ireland, it could turn foggy, and it certainly will turn cold here with a touch of frost in rural areas. For most, though, it's quite a bit milder tonight compared to last night. Quite a lot of cloud, though, to start with on Wednesday. Many places starting dry. The rain edging away from Scotland, but we're looking at a bigger area of rain developing through the morning, perhaps over parts of the Midlands, southern England, and then lingering across eastern England in particular through the afternoon. So quite a wet second half of the day across eastern England. Turning drier through Wales and the southwest. Sunny spells for western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So a brighter day here. Still quite mild in the south, but it won't feel as warm with the clouds and the outbreaks of rain, which will still be pretty heavy during the evening time before that wet weather slowly pushes out into the North Sea as we head into Thursday morning. Following on behind, clear skies will allow a touch of frost in places to start Thursday. For many, it's a bright start, though, with sunny spells. Band of showery rain will cross Scotland and Northern Ireland during the course of the day before that starts to pull away. A bit of patchy rain for North Wales, Northern England for a time, but much of the south and east of England certainly having another sunny day on Thursday. And look at this, from Friday onwards, even into the weekend. Some patchy cloud, but many places looking fine, bright and sunny, although it will be windy along the south coast. Bye for now.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are